Hey, good morning. If the kids have not already headed back to their class at this time, they can go, but I think they're all out of here. My name's Dustin. I'm the worship pastor here, and so normally you'd see me with a guitar in front of me, which is like my safe place, but I chose a podium instead. Okay, so this week the craziest thing happened to me. So if you've been around, I'm not a great, I can tell stories well when it happens, like if we're hanging out and then a story comes up, I'm able to tell a story well. But when I have to think about if I'm going to use a story to introduce a sermon, I'm really bad at that. Because I feel like I'm forcing it, and then the whole time I'm preaching, I'm like, man, that didn't work. So this week I was thinking through, is there something that I could use as an introduction? And I was sitting at Breadco in my own little corner. And I had this idea that I'll look up this specific story. I think that these things happen. And so I was like, okay, I'll Google it. So I'm Googling. And I find an article. And I click it. And I'm like, dang, this is a killer story. And so I was like, I'll use this. And then for some reason, I thought, well, this is a pretty intimate story of this person. And maybe I don't normally think like this. It was definitely the Lord. I was like, well, I'll track this person down on Facebook and I'll reach out to them and see if it's cool if I use their story. So this person messages me back. I'm not a creep or anything. They message me back, and so the story has to do with this woman's wedding day. And so I have no idea who this girl is. I just read her story. I thought it was cool. So I reach out. She messages me back. And she's this super solid believer. She's like, yeah, totally. My story's the Lord's story. Just give him the credit. And I was like, what is happening right now? So we started talking back and forth, and I actually got an opportunity to FaceTime with her. Me and my wife did. Opportunity to FaceTime with her and talk about her story. So here's the story. When this girl, who's my age, I'm 20, almost 27. When she was a senior in high school, she was a swimmer. She was at a party. She dove into a pool, and something happened, and she became paralyzed from the neck down. And she woke up and really didn't know what happened, but knew that everything was different, and that she wasn't able to move. She wasn't able to move from the neck down. And so God has always been in and out of her life, and through this happening, she was at Target in her wheelchair, and some pastors came up and asked if they could pray for her. She was like, well, I guess because I'm in a wheelchair. And her mom actually made her go to that pastor's church. She gives her life to the Lord, and her life, she gets discipled, total 180, super awesome testimony. And she gets engaged and decides that she's going to try to. She had gotten to the point where she could kind of stand for about 30 minutes before her low blood pressure started taking a toll. And her name's Jackie, and she decided that she was going to try to walk down the aisle. It wasn't like a surprise. She was like, hey, future husband, I am going to try to walk down the aisle. And so she was at the gym about 4 months before she got married. The Lord told her, because she was living with her fiance at the time, said, you've got to move out of your fiance's house. If you honor me, I'll bless your marriage. And she was like, oh boy. Because he was like her rock. He helped her. And so she does it. She moves out. and they go to the gym one night, about 4 months before their wedding, and she was on one of those bike machines where you have to pump at a certain speed for it to stay on, and it kept turning off because she couldn't get it fast enough. And she started crying and was like, Lord, I can't do this. And she said, and I heard the Spirit say to me, you do what you can, I'll meet you where you can't. Which I was like, were you crying more after that? Because that's what I would have been doing. And so she decides she's just going to go for it. So the next 4 months, she really prepares for this. On her wedding day, she leaves her wheelchair behind. Her parents help her walk down the aisle. She stands during the whole ceremony. And then, without really realizing it, because of the help of her husband and the Lord, she ends up not having to sit back down the rest of the night. She had only stood for like 30 minutes before this, and she realized about halfway through her reception that she's not tired. Like, she's not having a problem staying up. She's been kind of clinging on to her husband all night. And so, super, super awesome story. But I tell you that story, we recorded the audio of the conversation we had. If you want the audio, I can send it to you. She said it was totally fine. It was about an hour long. I would recommend listening to it. It was so good. She is so cool. And I tell you that story to say that when you decide to make a hard decision, like a decision that's going to take time to prepare for, you're probably not going to be able to do it on your own. Like, the reality is that if you make a decision that's going to affect the immediate future of your life, chances are, and a lot of you have been through this, you need help. You need encouragement from people you love, because there are going to be days where you come up short and it's brutal. You want to quit, you want to give up. And so the whole time she was doing this, people that were close to her, her future husband, who's now her husband, her parents, they were all cheering her on. And she pressed into Jesus every day. And he just gave her the strength. Super, super, super incredible story. And I tell you that to say that Jesus is going to call us to something super hard. And when he does that for two reasons. One, because he wants to be your strength. He's not going to call you into something that he's also not going to provide the ability to do it for you. And two, because he's probably also already started to call people around you to do something hard like that. And when we are connected within a community in such a deep way like that, it makes the hard thing less brutal, because you're able to be built up and encouraged by those who love you and those who want to be on the same path, same trajectory. And so we're in Matthew 7. We've been going through the Sermon on the Mount. And so far in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus has told us the way that he wants us to live. And the last couple weeks, he's been walking us through the ways in which we live out the way that he wants us to live. And so we've talked about things like the Lord's Prayer, how you pray. We've talked about things like fasting, laying up treasures in heaven, not being anxious, not judging, pursuing God, doing life in unity with God and with one another. And these last two things, pursuing God, doing life in unity with one another, these are what we're going to talk through today. But first, I want to just quickly point out to you that in this section of Matthew, where he starts telling you about how you can live out the life he's called you to live out, there's two bookends. And the first one is the Lord's Prayer. And the second one is asking, seeking, and knocking. And so if we're going to be successful to any degree in living a life that reflects God's character, then it's undoubtedly going to have something to do with pursuing God. He wouldn't start a section off with prayer and end a section off with seeking him if he's not trying to make a point about what it's going to take to live a life that seeks Jesus. You follow me with that? Does that make sense? If you just read Matthew, it's easy to see. So pick up with me in chapter 7. Chapter 7, verse 7 and 8. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you'll find. Knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks it will be opened. Now, chances are you've heard this verse before. How many of you have heard this verse before, at least one time in your life? Yeah. Okay, it's a pretty common verse. Ask, seek, knock. And What I want to do is I want to attempt to do this in a new light today. If you've been tracking with us through the Sermon on the Mount, then you've actually heard Jesus talk about some of this before. And so let me ask you something. When you've been reading these verses before, maybe you've been told these verses before, maybe these verses have been preached to you before, have you ever asked yourself, what does Jesus mean when he says that we should ask him something? Have you ever thought about, what does Jesus mean when he says that we should ask him something? And he's actually already talked about it in the Sermon on the Mount. And so if you go back to chapter 6, verse 8, he says, your Father knows what you need before you ask him, which is actually a reworking of a psalm, Psalm 139:4, that says, even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. Jesus is just quoting and reworking something that's already been given in the Old Testament scriptures. He says, your Father, he already knows. Like, ask me, but listen, he already knows. And I know that clears it up. That clears up the question for you. What does it mean? To answer what it means, we have to understand that our questions, they don't catch God off guard. He's not sitting across a table from you, wondering what you're going to ask, hoping he's going to have the right response, like we would if we were sitting across from a table with one another and you had a question for me and I didn't know what the question was. Chances are I'd be kind of nervous because I have no idea what you're going to ask me. And usually people who want to sit down and have coffee with me have crazy questions. And so I never know what's coming. But Jesus is not that way. He's not sitting thinking, wow, Dustin is a lunatic. What is he possibly going to ask me? That's not how the Lord approaches this topic. He says he already knows. So why tell us to ask? Why would Jesus tell us to ask him if he already knows what we're going to ask? Well, we have to think about what has come before. And so he's been talking about fasting, treasuring, fighting anxiety, and not judging. And all of those things, if you think about it, all of those things, when you fast, when you force yourself to lay up treasures in heaven and not on the earth, when you fight the battle of anxiety, when you force yourself not to judge others, what those do are they create humility in you. It's about pursuing humility. And these are spiritual disciplines that take me off of my throne and help me see that Jesus is king of my life. So in order to do this, we're going to need help from someone outside of ourselves who has already succeeded in allowing themselves to be crushed in order to put God on display. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Jesus knows that if we're going to do this thing right, if we're going to be successful in living for the Lord, that it's going to take help from someone who's already done it. He tells us to ask as an act of humility. Listen, if you're taking notes, Jesus tells us to ask as an act of humility. Asking is an act of humility. It's saying, I just can't do this, and I need you. It's not something complicating and crazy. Jesus isn't looking for some wild formula. He just says, when you ask, just humble yourself and say, I can't do it. And listen, if you think about like how people build relationships, okay? If I'm meeting you for the first time, chances are I'm going to ask you some questions because I literally know nothing about you. And so I'll ask you like, what's your name? You from around here? I actually had this conversation, you from around here? How'd you hear about this place? I just want to know who you are. And so I'll ask you questions. That's how relationship building works. And if you ask enough questions and you build the right relationship, chances are you're going to seek that person out to continue to get to know them. You know how that works? Like when you're like, wow, they're cool. Maybe I should see if they want to do dinner. And you seek them out. Hey, do you want to hang out? Do you want to go with me to Home Depot? I don't know. I don't know where you invite people to. That's not where I invite people to. It's just the closest place. Do you want to come with me to whatever? You want to go out to lunch? You want to go to dinner? You want to blah, 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 blah. It turns into that. And so it's not a coincidence that Jesus says ask first and then seek, because typical relationship building between one another is you ask things first and then you end up seeking that person out because you want to continue to get to know them. So what does Jesus mean when he tells us to seek? Once again, he's already talked about this. In just a few verses before, in Matthew 6:33, he says, "But first, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." And Eric went over this a couple weeks ago, and I would recommend going back and listening to that because it was an amazing, amazing sermon. But Jesus says that in light of battling anxiety, because when you truly set out to seek something out, you put everything else out of the picture. And so he's talking about battling anxiety and all of the lies and things that come into that. And so seek first the kingdom. The reason that Jesus tells people to seek first the kingdom is because if you're thinking about seeking something out, you want a new job, you want that new car or whatever, you want to get better at something, and so you seek that thing out. What you do is you put on blinders. I mean, you go after that thing. When you're like really seeking after something, chances are you're not thinking about the other things that might get in the way. You just go for it. And especially if you're in here and you're a go-getter, like going for it isn't enough. You know what I'm saying? Like you seek after something and then you get it. Like there's no not getting it. You just get it because that's how you are. And that's what Jesus said, like just seek it. Go after it. Seeking Jesus, listen, it's how you move forward in the humility that you've already displayed by asking Jesus for help. You say, Lord, I can't do it. I need you. And he says, okay, come here. And so you go. Listen, if you have a good relationship with someone, you say, hey, man, I need help. Can I meet with you or talk with you or whatever? What you have to do is you have to go to that person. You go to that person and you continue to build a relationship with them. Jesus says, yeah, okay, you can't do this without me. Okay, now come and follow me. And you say, okay, and you seek after Jesus. And what happens is you start to pursue Jesus. He's your main pursuit, which means you're getting to know him. It means you're learning who he is and where he goes, the things he says, and why he says them. You notice patterns. And all of a sudden, it's like you're following him. You see how that works? When Jesus says, come and follow me, it's not like something crazy. You just seek after him. And as you seek after Jesus, you just start to learn. You start to pick up on the little things. If you think about like making a best friend, like me and Ben, who's in the kids right now, we are best friends. He's my dude. And we have done life for so long that he has mannerisms of mine and I just have mannerisms of his. Like right now, I'm wearing office socks from the show that say Dwight Schrute Farms. And they've got beats on them. And the first thing I did when I came in today, I was like, Ben, look at these bad boys. Because I knew that he would love them because we've developed this bond together and we have these things that we share and that we built together. When I go to his house, I know the things he's going to do. I know how he's going to welcome me. When he comes to my house, he knows exactly what he's going to see. He's going to see too many houseplants. Listen, we know each other. We know what to expect, so we spent so much time. When you start to follow Jesus, those things, it's just going to happen. When you seek after Jesus, you're going to realize that you've been following him for a lot longer than you thought. And in Matthew 18, he actually says that he's pursued you in the same way. He talks about the sheep, the 99. Right? He leaves the 99, he goes after the one, and you're the one. He says, listen, when you were far from me, I left everything behind, and I pursued you solely until I found you, and I brought you back. And Jesus says, listen, just seek after me in the same way. Come and find me. Follow me. Let me be your main pursuit. And so as asking has developed into seeking, then there's another step if you think about relationship building. Listen, when you're seeking after someone for so long, okay, you're building a relationship with someone. The Hollands are here, but I'll use them as an example. When me, Taylor's my wife, and the Hollands started to get to know each other, after we became close enough friends, I want to know what they did? They invited us over for dinner. So where did we end up? On their front porch. When you start to develop a relationship with someone, eventually you're going to end up at their place. It's just how it works. When you love someone enough, you just invite them over. When I knew that I was going to marry Taylor, I was like, hey, we should meet up here. You know what I'm saying? And then I proposed. I invited her to the place. And Jesus says, come knock, knock. Why? Why would he say knock? Listen, if you're at someone's house, you knock. When you knock, it's because you trust them. You know that they're going to answer. And you trust them because you've been you've asked them some questions. You've started to seek after them. And so you knock at their door. And now if you know people like I know people, sometimes when you knock, then the garage door opens, right? Or they come around the back and they're like, hey, come over here, right? Or they're dirty from digging something in the backyard and they're like, just give me a second. Listen, just because we knock doesn't mean we know how Jesus is going to answer. But he calls you to knock. And he calls us to trust because you've been asking and you've been seeking. And so now you're at his doorstep. Why would you be at his doorstep if you didn't trust that he was going to answer? That's how it works. My wife and her mom have a very tight relationship. So tight that she calls her mom repeatedly because she knows eventually her mom will answer. She just calls all the time. And so I'll be in the car, and my wife will call her mom. It'll be on speaker. And her aunt's voicemail will come on. And she's like, doop, boop. And then it calls again. And all of her siblings do this to each other all the time. Okay? And so they just call until they answer. This is how it does. But listen, when they answer, they're never upset about it. That's crazy to me. Because if my sister called me more than twice, I'd be like, what? Obviously, I'm not answering for a reason. Why are you calling me? But her family's like, yo, hello. And then they respond with, hello. And then they outdo each other. And I'm in the car like, oh no, what have I gotten into? Listen, they know that they're loved by the person they're calling. So they just call repeatedly until they answer. That's what Jesus says. He says, you know I love you. You've asked me the questions. I've given you answers. You've seeked after me and you've learned from me. Now come to my house and knock and I'll answer. Jesus says, humble yourself, make me your singular focus, and wait for me. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks will be opened. So pick with me at verse 9. Or which one of you, if his son asks him for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a serpent? That's crazy, right? Could you imagine growing up as a kid? Be like, Mom, I'm hungry. She gives you a bag of rocks. Maybe not. Maybe that happened to you. My bad. Listen, when I was 10, we had Christmas. You know how you do that? And we were at my grandparents' house, and my cousin was opening his present. And this thing was heavy. I remember because I carried it to him. And heavy presents usually mean one thing, like it's a good one. I don't know why that's what you think when you pick up a heavy present, but you're like, this is going to be like a car. This is going to be great. He opened it up, and it was a brick. It was just a brick. It wasn't like hiding something. My grandpa just thought it would be hilarious if my cousin opened a brick. That's crazy. And so I was terrified every present I opened after that. I was like, no, I don't want a brick. I don't think it's funny. But just imagine, you're a kid, that's crazy. Dad, I'm hungry. Oh, here's some stones. You're supposed to laugh when Jesus says that. That's why I say that. So, if he asks you for a fish, will you give him a serpent? Hopefully not. If you then, who are evil... Whoa, Jesus. That was quite the 180. Can you imagine you're laughing and he's like, so then you who are evil. You're like, oh. Is he talking to me? Yes. If you then who are evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? So listen, what he's saying is and what we tend to do, you and I, is if we have the ability to be in control, we will conveniently manipulate the end of the situation to feed my needs and my tribe. This is what we do. Whether you say you don't or not, given the opportunity and the right circumstances, you will manipulate the circumstances to fit your needs best. And it might not be like a horrible thing that you're doing. You might just change the score to a game to win. I don't know. It's not like you're murdering people, but what we do and what we desire to do is just have everything work out for our benefit. And so if given the opportunity, you will work out the thing for your benefit. It's how we are. We're busted like that. This is what we do. And all of history, human history, will verify that for you. If you were born before 2000, which I know there are actually people here who were born after 2000, which is terrifying to me. But if you were born between 1900 and 2000, you were born in the bloodiest generation that our world has ever seen. The bloodiest generation, because everyone wanted to win. That's what it boiled down to. And that's a terrifying reality. So just the last 120 years will tell you that there's something wrong within us where we want to bend the ending to fit my needs and my people. Jesus says, if you, who will always conveniently bend the rules to fit your agenda, know how to give good gifts, how much more will your Father in heaven? Do you see what he's saying there now? It's not like you who trip up sometimes also know how to give good gifts. It's like you who would rather give yourself the best gift also know how to give good gifts. How much more will the selfless Father in heaven give great gifts? Does that make sense? You tracking with that? The answer to your searching is coming, Jesus says. But you have to press into him and you have to wait. But what are we supposed to ask for? You ever thought about that? Like why, not just why does Jesus call me to ask, but what does he call me to ask for? And I'm sure if you Google or you YouTube, what should I ask Jesus for? You'll get some crazy answers. Crazy answers. And some of you are already thinking about people who you don't listen to because you don't agree with what they say you should ask God for. Okay? There are whole theologies built around asking God for certain things. And so I think it's a fair question to ask. What are we supposed to ask for? How many of you have wrestled with that question? Really? Okay, good. I'm glad I'm not the only one. And there is an answer. But to answer it, because hopefully you know me by now, we're going to go all the way to Genesis. My favorite book. I can't preach and not talk about Genesis, you know? You don't have to flip there. I'll cover ground for you. But to answer the question, we have to go all the way back to page 1 of the Bible. And so we're just going to take a 30,000-foot flyover of some things real quickly because this is not a sermon series, okay? So listen, in Genesis 1 and 2, God creates order out of chaos. That's the whole point of Genesis 1 and 2. It's chaotic, it's a wasteland. God creates order out of the chaos. And he declares it to be either good or very good 7 times. And when God declares something to be good, he invites humanity into it. If you notice that, you're reading Genesis 1 and 2, God says something's good, he says everything's very good, and he invites humanity in to be a part of this good creation. And then something unexpected happens at the end of chapter 2. Something is not good. So if you're following Genesis 1, you should be surprised in Genesis 2 when God says, this is not good. Does anybody know what the not good is? Anyone? Man to be alone. It's not good for man to be alone. You guys remember that text? Oh, it's not good for man to be alone. You should be like, oh, what? Everything else has been good so far. There's no reason to think that God would create something that's not good. And all of a sudden he says, plot twist, this is not good. So God creates Eve. to be a suitable helper for Adam. And he tells them, listen, have lots of babies and rule over my creation, but don't eat of this one tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Okay? He says, have a bunch of babies, rule over the earth, don't eat from the tree. God gives 2 jobs. Rule over the earth with your family as my partner. Don't eat from the tree. He says, I've given you everything. Everything you could ever want, everything you could ever desire, all of it. I've given it all to you. Just don't eat from the one tree. And so let me ask you a question. Up to this point in the narrative, who has decided that things are good and not good? God. God is the only one who has declared things to be good or not good. Okay, so then you move into chapter 3. And all of a sudden, this allegiance to the Lord gets tested by the serpent. The serpent comes in and says, did God really say you shouldn't eat from any tree? And Eve's like, no. He said, not from that one tree. And the serpent says, oh, well, you're surely not going to die. God knows that you'll become like God if you take from the tree. And the hard part about that text is they're already made in the image of God. They're already His ambassadors. They already reflect Him. And so Satan's already just enticing them with something they already possess. He says, you'll be like God. And God knows that. And so in Genesis chapter 3, it says that Eve saw that the fruit was good to the eye, pleasurable for food, and good to make one wise. So she takes it, and she eats it, and she gives it to her husband. And all of a sudden, all of humanity spirals out of control. Who should Adam and Eve have asked about whether it was good or not to eat from the tree? God. Listen, at this point in the narrative, you should be thinking, uh-oh, when did Eve become able, or Adam, to declare something to be good or not? When did that happen? Because the only people who have been able to do it are God. And so when it says that Eve and Adam think that that's good to do, that should throw up some red flags for you. That's a big deal. When God sees something as good, it brings forth life. And when humanity sees that something is good, it leads to tragedy and death. That's how it rolls. Adam and Eve should have sought out the Lord. They should have said, hey, the serpent said that it's good to do this. Is it? Listen, I'll give you 2. Maybe you're like, oh, I don't know about that statement. Let me give you 2 examples. In 2 Samuel 11, David's supposed to be at war. Okay? But he doesn't go, which should raise some red flags for you. Like, why doesn't... David should be at war, and he doesn't. And instead he stays back. And while he's pacing around on his roof, like, I don't know, typical king, I guess, he sees across the way a woman bathing. That woman's name is Bathsheba. And so it says in 2 Samuel, verbatim, that David saw that she was beautiful, which is the same word as good in Hebrew, it's tov. Saw that she was good. He sends for his guards to go take her, and he does what he wants with her. It's the same language. It's verbatim in 2 Samuel 11. She gets pregnant. So he decides to tell her husband, Uriah, to come, who is at war right now, to come back thinking that he's been at war so long, he'll come back, he'll have sex with his wife. They'll never know. Like, he will never know that it's actually David's kid. He's so heartbroken that he's away from his soldiers who are dying. He sleeps on his doorstep. He doesn't even go in the house to see his wife. Fail. Okay? Fail. So David ends up murdering Uriah. Just murders him in cold blood. Then he loses the son. Okay? Then, after that, he has 2 more sons, one named Solomon, one named Absalom. If you know anything about the story of David, Absalom is a train wreck. Tries to murder David, tries to take over the throne, ends up dying. No one really knows how, but he's just found hanging from a tree. And it started with David saying, I see that she's good. I'm going to take her for myself. The man after God's own heart doesn't go after God's own heart, decides in his own power what's good and what's not, and it leads to death and tragedy. So you think, well, what about Solomon? How'd he do? Well, let me tell you, it's not great. In 1 Kings, the next book in the Bible, his son, David has died. Solomon has taken over the kingdom. He's become king. And he is on a mountaintop, and he has just made 1,000 sacrifices on the mountaintop. Just imagine for a second. You made 1,000 sacrifices, animal sacrifices on a mountaintop. That is exhausting to think about, let alone probably do. That's got to be a mess. 1,000 sacrifices. He's on a mountaintop. He makes 1,000 sacrifices. And he falls asleep, probably out of exhaustion. The Lord shows up to him in a dream and says, ask of me whatever you want, and I'll give it to you. And you're like, oh no, this has not gone good so far. Man has been really bad at asking for the right things if they even approach the Lord. But you get in 1 Kings 3, and Solomon says, I don't know how to go in or come out, talking about leading a people. And your servant, in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted. Give me, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this great people? He says, I don't know how to discern between what is good and what is bad. And if I do it in my own eyes, it's going to lead to death and tragedy. Will you show me what is good, what is bad, what is evil? And the Lord says, oh, I'll do that. And because you didn't ask for it, I'll make your kingdom great. I'll do all of these things. It will be wonderful. And then Solomon's a train wreck after that. Because that's the only time he seeks the Lord. This is the only time. Every decision after that he makes on his own. He puts his own people under forced labor to build the temple. I mean, it's a mess. Solomon immediately goes downhill. He dips because he stops seeking the Lord on a regular basis. He has this one awesome encounter with Jesus or with the Lord, and after that he's like, I'm probably good. Starts making decisions on his own, and it leads to a lot of death and a lot of tragedy. So, what are we supposed to ask? God wants us to ask Him to show us His ways. From the first page of the Bible, God has just wanted us to ask Him to show us His ways. And it sounds simple, but if you do it one day, then you have to do it the next. It's not, if you just read any part of the Hebrew Scriptures, any part of the Old Testament, you'll realize that the people who failed, which is all of them, what they didn't do was just ask every day. It's a daily battle. It's real. That's why asking turns into seeking and seeking turns into knocking, because Jesus knows this can't be a one-day thing. You can't just go to a conference and assume you're good and come home and expect everything to change. You can't have a high moment with the Lord and then come home and say, ooh, that was great. I'm sure it's going to carry me for the rest of my life. And then stop seeking Him. It doesn't work. And you know people like that who have their lives have turned into a train wreck because they had this killer moment with the Lord. They were on fire for like 3 months, and then they never got discipled. They never asked anybody for help. They stopped reading the Word. They stopped seeking Jesus. And now they've probably all but turned away from the Lord. I know so many people who got saved at a church camp and then went home and never did anything with it, never asked for discipleship, never pressed into the Lord, never asked, how do you read your Bible, never sought out any help, and the older generation didn't do anything to help it because they didn't seek that person to help them out, and those people have all but left the church. Why? Because no one wants it to be a day-to-day walk, but Jesus calls you to make it a day-to-day thing. Jesus says, ask me to show you my ways. And I'll do it. He does it every time. But you can't expect the answer to one day's problems be the answer to tomorrow's as well. He wants to show you His ways renewed every day. When we ask God to show us how He sees His creation, listen, then we have to stop and listen. You have to stop and listen. And this is really important for the next section. This is really important. If you want to know how Jesus lives, then you got to stop doing what you think is good, and you have to trust that He's going to show you a better way that's not going to lead to death and tragedy, but it's going to lead to patterns of life, everlasting, coming out of you into other people. That's the gospel stories that we see that Jesus is enough. We say, Lord, will you be my Savior? He transforms your life. And then from every day after that, until you see Him face to face, on the other side, you say, Lord, show me your ways, because I still have no idea how to do this. Because the trick is, when you think you know how to do it, you're going to fail, because you stop seeking the Lord humbly, and you assume that you've been shown enough to make it, and eventually you'll fall. And it's a dangerous place to be. And we have to understand that before we move on. Because if you don't get that, and you're not willing to stop and watch how Jesus does it so that you can learn, you're not going to be able to do this next thing. Take a look with me at verse 12. So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. Enter by the narrow gate. For the gate is wide, and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter it are many. For the gate is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. You have, if you call yourself a Jesus follower, and if you don't, that's okay. But if you do, you have a responsibility to love one another. You have a responsibility for one another, to one another. To one another, one another. Okay, as Eric likes to say. Listen, and when Jesus says, you have a responsibility for one another because you call yourself mine, and we say, okay, Lord, how do I do it? You are going through the narrow gate. Let me be very clear. Because people are great at destroying you. They're great at seeing you in their way and tearing you apart. They're great at deciding what is good in their own eyes and leaving a trail of brokenness and bodies in their wake. And you know what I'm talking about. Everyone in here has been torn down by someone at least one time in their life. Listen, human beings are a mess, and they're a mess that God loves. And when we say that we love God and we follow Him, He expects us to love the mess. But it is hard. And you know what I'm talking about. You know those people that are hard to love. Some of you know you're that person. And that's okay. I'm that person. I'm way too much for my wife. Way too much. And she loves me, and I don't know why. But she chooses every day, to love me, even when she does not agree with me. And that's okay. Listen, we are a mess, and we will bend the outcome to fit our needs in our marriages, in our relationship, in our leadership, in our churches. We will. And we won't even realize we're doing it half the time. And I'm called to love those people, the people who argue with me about riots and masks. You know, like, come on. The people who want Donald Trump or Biden, like, I have to love those people. And Jesus will say, yeah, love the mess. I do. It's real. It's real. And it's not going to change. The names are going to change as you get older, but the ways are not. And the more vulnerable you make yourself to someone, the more chance they're going to destroy you. Because that's what happened to Jesus. Jesus says that there's a way of loving people that builds them up and brings life. It creates patterns of holiness in the world, and it leads people to Jesus, and it transforms their life. And that way is so, so hard because people are hard to love. And those are the very people you're going to be called to love. We are hard to love. We naturally define what is good and what is bad on our own terms. And history in the last 100 years tells us that we're always going to leave brokenness in our path. The best Christian will still hurt people. The closest person to the Lord is still going to mess up. So why would Jesus call me to love others this way if I can't do it? Ever think about that? It's hard. Really. Why would Jesus call me to do this if it's that discouraging? Have you ever had that moment where you hear you should love others as you want to be loved? And you're like, that's hard because I want to win all the time. I want to be number one. I wish I didn't, but I do. Why? Why would he ask me to do that? And listen, it's because he's offering you a new life for those who believe. Listen, he offers daily wisdom of good and bad in his eyes to those who seek and knock and ask, so that we can live out sacrificial love, like real, genuine, brings people together, casts away differences, and focuses on unity kind of love. And listen, some of you might be thinking, when I gave my life to Jesus, I'm a new person. So, why am I hard to love if I've been created new? And you're right. The old has passed away, the new has come. But don't assume that because you have a relationship with God, you now know everything. That's what Adam and Eve did. And look where we are. That's real. Just because we have a relationship with the Lord doesn't mean we know what to do. It means we know who to love and we know who to ask for strength. The narrow gate is a day-to-day process of asking Jesus for strength for every step that you're going to have to take through the gate. It's going to require you to link arms with your brothers and your sisters, to get up and move forward. It's going to require you to press into Jesus, to ask for his strength to move through the gate. And listen, the gate doesn't end. Wouldn't that be nice? One day you're going to see Jesus face to face, and then the gate will end. But until then, if you're choosing to love like Jesus loves, your life is in the narrow gate. That is where you live. Bring your sleeping bag. You're not leaving, ever. And it's a great place to be, because Jesus is going to show up. But it won't be easy. It'll be satisfying, it'll be fulfilling, it'll bring you joy that is lasting. But it will not be easy, because we are not easy people to love. We're easy until we hurt you. And it's easy to love someone when everything's great. But the moment that their sin comes out against you specifically, you will question whether or not you want to do this thing. In leadership, in the church, in your marriage, the moment that sin comes out towards you and not just out, you have a choice to keep going through the narrow gate or not. And when you don't, it's going to leave a trail of destruction behind you. But if you do, I'm telling you, Jesus says, you'll be able to look back and see a legacy of Jesus offering life to people in your footsteps. He's going to carry you with his strength, and you're going to just exude his presence because he's the only thing you're going to need. Listen, when I got to talk to Jackie yesterday morning, and she told me about being on that bike, and the Lord said, listen, do what you can, I'll meet you where you can. That was so good. Because I always just do what I can. And that's it. That's my go-to. right? I mean, I just do what I can. And I think that I would like to think that I was inviting Jesus into that, but reality is I probably wasn't. I was just doing what I can, hoping that it ends well. I never think about the fact that Jesus wants to meet me where I can't, and He wants to fuel me where I can. Listen, Jesus, He lives that life. He does it. And that's good news. He lives the life that we're called to live, to love those who get taken advantage of, to love those who are hard to love those who hate Him, and it takes Him to His death. It crucifies Him. The narrow gate for Jesus kills Him. But it springs forth new life. The story doesn't end at His death, it begins at His resurrection. It's good news that there is someone who loved God perfectly, loved God's creation perfectly, and death couldn't stop Him from doing it. And so listen, when you're in the narrow gate and it is tight, and it doesn't feel like the people around you are able to pull you any farther, and you do not want to keep loving these fools, Jesus says, I've already done it. I'll give you the strength. I have more than enough. Jesus is not going to call you into something He's not going to give you the strength to go through. It's not going to happen. And if that thing leads you to your death, Jesus is going to give you the strength to make it through. If you ask Him, He will show you His ways. He will show you what is good and what is not good. He will lead you, even through your death, to be able to share who He is. I'm not saying that if you get crucified, you're going to need to preach the gospel. I'm saying that if you get murdered by someone and you're seeking the Lord, chances are your life is going to exude His holiness. And it's going to become a story of God's goodness. And if you don't die, great. Then you have another opportunity to ask God to show you His ways so that the next step you take is one for His glory. It's not going to be easy. I wish I could tell you. I wish I could tell you it's going to be easy. I really do, but I can't. Because it hasn't been for me. It wasn't for anyone in the Bible, and it wasn't for Jesus. To assume that it was easy for Jesus is crazy. It brings Him to His death. And so the question I have for you is, have you ever asked Jesus outside of a moment where you felt like you were on a mountaintop, just made 1,000 sacrifices to show you His ways? Have you done it in the valley? Have you done it for more than one day in a row? Have you done it more than once in a day? Have you ever done it? Listen, He died for you so that He could free you from death and then show you a new way that brings freedom from death to other people. You have a responsibility for one another. And Jesus says you don't have to do it alone, and you don't have to make a mess of things. He says He'll show you. He shows me. And listen, I'm a train wreck, y'all. It's real. I'm a mess. Ask my wife. I'm a mess. But God is so good. And no matter how much of a mess I am or how much of a mess she is, He gives us strength to love us despite. And His glory, His presence in our marriage is crazy. Not because we do anything right. Chances are we don't. But because we press into the Lord. Listen, those relationships that you have that are super tight, chances are they're super tight because you're centering them around the Lord, and you know that you can go to those people at any time for anything, and they'll point you to Jesus. But when it's people who are hard to love, we don't think like that. And Jesus says, think like that. Think like that. I'll show you how. You just got to ask. Because when you ask Him how to show, when we say, show me your ways, He says, okay, seek me. And when we seek Him, we end up at His place where He teaches us. We don't even realize it half the time. I'll leave you with this one story, and then you can decide what to do. When I first became a believer, I had a cousin who was a pastor. He was a youth pastor at the time. And he had caught wind. Our family had split up when I was real young. It was real chaotic. It was real messy. And he had caught wind that I'd become a believer my freshman year of college. And so he invited me to get lunch. And I had not seen this dude in 7, 8 years maybe. He's a couple years older than me. And it was awkward. Awkward. I don't know if you've ever not seen a family member for like a decade and then they invite you out to lunch. Weird, y'all. It's weird. But he didn't let it end that way. He loved Jesus. He loved me. He saw this new fire in me as a way to rekindle our family relationship, and he pursued me. And for years, we hung out. For years, I helped lead worship at his youth group, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't realize until about 4 or 5 years later that he was discipling me the whole time. The whole time. And now I do the same thing to people, and I'm like, oh, I see what you were doing. You were discipling me. That's what he just brought me along. He let me ask questions. He let me follow him because he was following Jesus. He showed me how to do things. He showed me the way that God says things are right and wrong. He encouraged me to press into Jesus. He encouraged me to seek him. And I didn't even realize I was being discipled. I didn't even realize I was following the Lord as earnestly as I was until I look back. I was challenged to love. Listen, his whole youth group, I hope they're listening right now. They were hard to love. They were a bunch of goons, dude. I mean, just weird kids, but I love them. They're so great. And I'm still in contact with most of them to this day. But they were hard to love because I was a popular kid in high school and these dudes weren't. None of them were. And I was like, who are these weirdos? And my cousin was like, you don't get to do that. You just don't. And it was a hard pill to swallow. And years later, I realized what he was doing. And I realized that I was being formed in the image of the Lord that whole time. You just got to start asking Jesus to show you his ways. Surround yourself with people who do it. Encourage people around you to do it. Because chances are, there's going to be a day you're side by side in that narrow gate, being asked to love somebody that's hard. What are you going to do? You're going to ask Jesus, or you're going to decide on your own how to do it? We've seen how they both work out. So I just want to challenge you guys today. The band's going to come back up, and we're going to sing just a couple more songs. And I just want to challenge you. You have an opportunity. You're going to leave here today, and you're going to encounter a hard love situation. It's going to be in your family. It's going to be in your marriage. It's going to be at the grocery store. I got cussed out at Aldi the other day because I went in line. It was crazy. But it happens. It happens every day. You're going to be put in a situation where it's going to be hard to love somebody, and you're not going to see it coming. It's going to happen today, I bet. And the call is, are you going to seek the Lord? You have the opportunity to prepare right now. Say, Lord, would you show me your ways? Because I want to love people who are hard to love. I want to love people that are easy to love, that come into my life in situations that are hard to love them. I just want to love people the way that you love them. God, I want to make it through the narrow gate, and so I'm pressing into you. Help me seek you. Let me realize that I'm in your house. Like, you've given me everything I need to learn. You can start now. Because chances are, it might not be today, but it'll be this week at your workplace with that boss that you'd rather push off a cliff than say yes to again. Like, it's going to happen. What are you going to do? You're going to keep leaving destruction and turmoil in your path, or are you going to let God make a new one? Jesus says he's enough. He's enough for you, and so he's enough for those who are around you. And he wants to use you to show them. Pray. Lord, you're good, and it's not easy. It's not easy to know that you're good, because that means that you like to love people who are busted. You enjoy and thrive loving the broken and the lost, which means that if we're going to follow you and be your ambassador and reflect you, then we have to do the same thing. We have to learn how to love other people. We have to learn how to love the busted and the broken, the chaotic, the misfits, the poor, the taken advantage of, the outcast, the orphan, all of it. So would you show us your ways? Would you teach us the difference between how you see what is good and how you see what is not good? Would you show us how to live out your ways, how to actually love as you love? Lord, would you put us on that path? Would you not let us steer far from it? Lord, we love you, and we genuinely, we want to serve you, God. We want to serve you. We don't want to carry on the legacy of brokenness in this place, Lord. We don't. We don't. So help our legacy be one of holiness, one of righteousness, one of you first and us second every day. Help the legacy of this church be one of Jesus first. God, and I pray that everyone in here and everyone not in here that would have part in listening or watching or whatever, Lord, that we would be a body of people that want to see your love on display and know that you call us to do that. We can't be sideliners. We can't be in the stands hoping someone else is going to do it. You call us to the narrow gate, and I pray that we would seek you in it and through it. That we would get to the other side and you would say, you made it through the narrow gate. Lord, that we would press into you the whole time. Make us a people hungry for you. Make us a people that trust you or that want to trust you. Would you start something in us, Lord? And let it be a day-to-day process of working it out every day because you're worthy. You saw us as worthy of working it out day to day. And you plan to meet us every day. And so if you plan to meet us every day, I pray we would invite you in every day. Lord, we love you. Praise you. In Jesus' name, amen.